I've been making videos refuting lies and misinformation spread by feminists for more than a year now, and in that time I've noticed that some arguments keep coming up over and over again. That's why I've decided to consolidate the most common feminist talking points and the rebuttals in a convenient list. These are 22 dumb feminist arguments.
Intimate partner violence is a patriarchal system of oppression used by men to control women.
Half of all intimate partner violence is reciprocated, meaning both parties abuse each other in half of all intimate partner violence cases. And when it comes to non-reciprocated intimate partner violence, women are the perpetrators more than 70% of the time. This is according to differences in frequency of violence and reported injury between relationships with reciprocal and non-reciprocal intimate partner violence, a study conducted by Daniel J. Whitaker et al. And published in the American Journal of Public Health by the CDC in May 2007. Even in cases of reciprocated violence, women are more likely to initiate it. According to Sex Differences in Aggression Between Heterosexual Partners, a meta-analytic review by John Archer of the University of Central Lancashire in 2000, even though men are more likely to inflict injury when they commit violence, women commit violence against their intimate partners more often. It should also be pointed out that, according to the CDC, in 2010, lesbian couples experienced more intimate partner violence than heterosexual couples or homosexual men, and in fact, lesbians experience more intimate partner violence than any other group with the exception of bisexual women. This does not support the view that men who commit violence against women are part of some patriarchal conspiracy to oppress women.
Rape is a patriarchal system of oppression used by men to control women.
When we take rapes that happen in prisons into account, more men are victims of rape than women, and in fact, a man is more likely to be raped in a prison than a woman is to be raped anywhere outside of prison. If rape is meant to be a tool for men to control women, then it wouldn't be the case that most rape victims are male. It seems that rape is simply a crime of opportunity committed by individuals against other individuals, and not part of some global conspiracy to oppress women.
We live in a rape culture.
To assert that we live in a rape culture is to assert that our culture celebrates and protects rapists, which it clearly doesn't. Aside from the fact that all forms of rape are illegal everywhere, rape is seen as such a heinous act by the bulk of society that men accused of rape are treated as guilty by the court of public opinion, even in the complete absence of evidence, and lose their reputation, their education and career prospects, their jobs, their homes, and in some cases, their lives. Furthermore, the idea that a rape culture exists is harmful both to men because it blames rape on toxic masculinity, thus implying that all men are rapists or potential rapists, and to rape victims because it takes the focus off of those who commit rape and puts it on society itself, thus making sexual violence more difficult to combat. As Rain once said, rape is caused not by cultural factors but by the conscious decisions of a small percentage of the community to commit a violent crime.
Only 2 to 8% of rape accusations are false, so we should listen and believe.
The 2 to 8% statistic is misquoted from an old FBI document from 1996 which says most crimes have a false report rate of 2%, but rape has a false report rate of 8%, so false rape reports actually happen 4 times more often than false reports for other crimes. But what's more important is the fact that this only includes provably false reports, and says nothing about unsubstantiated reports. A study conducted by the University of Massachusetts Boston in 2010 came up with a similar figure as the FBI, saying 2 to 10% of rape reports are false. This study based its figures on the reported rapes which took place over a 10-year period at a single university, of which there were 136. Of these 136 reported rapes, 8 were coded as false allegations, which is 5.9%. The abstract then goes on to say that these results, taken in the context of an examination of previous research, indicate that the prevalence of false allegations is between 2% and 10%. The study then cites a bunch of other studies from 1997 to 2008, then explains how they arrived at the 2 to 10% figure. They then go on to explain that another 44.9% of rape allegations at the university they studied didn't proceed to prosecution due to lack of evidence, the complainant refusing to cooperate, or the incident not meeting the legal definition of rape or sexual assault. Another 13.9% of rape allegations weren't coded as true, false, unsubstantiated, or otherwise due to lack of information about those particular cases. When we add together the 5.9% of provably false claims, the 44.9% of unsubstantiated claims, and the 13.9% of uncoded claims, we find that 64.7% of the rape claims at this university over a 10-year period were either false or potentially false. Now, that's just one university, but let's not forget that the rate of provably false claims at this university fell within the often quoted 2 to 8% figure, so we have to wonder how many of the rape claims made by the general population of the United States are potentially false. Furthermore, we also need to recognize that when we uncritically believe a claim made by an alleged victim, we are also implicitly believing the accusation being made against the accused. Rape, being as serious a crime as it is a very serious accusation which can have very serious, life-ruining ramifications for the accused, and this is why our justice system has such a high standard of evidence for rape accusations, at least in theory. It's better to let a guilty person go unpunished than it is to punish the innocent, which is why we need to treat those accused of crimes as innocent until proven guilty, even when it comes to rape accusations. A person who is falsely accused of rape is every bit as much of a victim as somebody who has been raped, and they also have an expectation of justice.
Only 2% of rapists ever get brought to justice.
This is based on a misleading statistic which assumes all rape accusations are true. As I just explained, they're not. When you start with the assumption that almost all rape claims are true, but then see that only a small handful of those claims result in a conviction, then yes, it's going to look like the vast majority of rapists go free, but you'd be wrong because your basal assumption that almost all rape claims are true is unfounded since, if the University of Massachusetts Boston study is any indication, as many as 2/3 of rape accusations are either false or unsubstantiated. Furthermore, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, among the people who do go to court for rape, about 2/3 get convicted, although part of that statistic includes convictions for other charges in addition to rape accusations. In any case, the claim that only 2% of rapists ever get brought to justice is misleading at best and is harmful at worst because it fuels hysteria and witch hunts.
Women still only get paid 73 cents for every dollar men get paid.
The wage gap is not so much a wage gap as it is an earnings gap. This is an important distinction. Even ignoring the fact that men tend to work higher paying jobs than women typically do, even in the same occupations, men tend to work more overtime, take off fewer vacation and sick days, are more likely to ask for raises and negotiate for higher starting salaries, prioritize earnings more, are more likely to take risks, retire at a later age, and so on. Furthermore, because the average man takes off less time over the course of his career than the average woman, he accumulates more experience over the same number of years, thus proving himself to be more valuable to his employer. To put it simply, the average man gets paid more than the average woman because the average man works more than the average woman. There is nothing discriminatory or unfair about this.
I'm sorry to interrupt this video, but I would like to announce I have opened a Patreon account. If you would like to help me support my channel, then click the link in the description. I don't currently offer any awards or incentives, but I would appreciate any donations. And if I get enough money, maybe I won't feel the need to put so many ad breaks on my videos.
The damsel in distress trope promotes the objectification of women by treating them as sex objects and reducing them to prizes to be won by men.
It could just as easily be argued that media which depict handsome, muscular men are objectifying men. Of course, the predictable feminist retort would be, depicting men as big and strong is an objectification because that's a male power fantasy, to which I would argue that being a sexually attractive woman is a female power fantasy. After all, is being sexy not a power which women can exploit for their advantage? Furthermore, if depicting a female character as a damsel in distress is a form of objectification because it reinforces the notion that women are prizes to be won by men, then I could just as easily argue that depicting men as brave heroes reinforces the notion that a real man needs to be strong and fearless, willing to endanger himself and sacrifice himself mentally, emotionally, and physically for the benefit of women. We're also used to seeing men die by the hundreds in movies and on TV that we never stop to think about how this reinforces the notion that men are disposable and that our lives only have value if we're willing to fight and die for some nebulous greater good. Nobody mourns the death of a stormtrooper, and the only reason we care when Obi-Wan dies is that he died heroically sacrificing himself. If he begged for mercy and died on his knees, or worse, if he got rescued by somebody else, we would all see him as a coward and would feel no sympathy for him. What does that say about society? Better yet, what does it say about a movement which claims to fight for equality that they never think about this sort of thing?
Feminists don't hate men. Feminism is about equality.
Even if we ignore all the hateful things feminist leaders have said about men, all the policies promoted by feminists which are harmful to men, and all of the times feminists have protested and disrupted men's issues conferences, feminism is, at its very core, an anti-male ideology. Feminist theory is entirely predicated on the notion that there exists a patriarchy which gives systemic advantages to men at the expense of women. Even ignoring the fact that this is demonstrably untrue as evidenced by the fact that a woman can steal a man's sperm or rape him and then sue him for child support, men get harsher sentences for equivalent crimes, men are required to sign up for selective service just to qualify for federal aid or to get a driver's license, among other things, feminists cannot acknowledge the systemic inequalities faced by men as doing so would undermine the most fundamental premise of their ideology. After all, men wouldn't face any systemic disadvantages if there actually existed a patriarchal system designed to privilege them. This is why feminists are so often hostile to men's rights advocacy. Any acknowledgement that men might not have it so great is a threat to feminism itself, and so feminism has to be hostile to men's rights and therefore cannot accurately be described as a movement for equality. Feminists do hate men. If you're a feminist and you don't hate men, then you should stop calling yourself a feminist.
If you're for equality, then you're a feminist. If you're not a feminist, then you're a sexist.
Feminists have to deny the existence of inequalities faced by men in order to protect the narrative of perpetual female victimhood needed to support the idea that there exists a patriarchy which is central to their ideology. Feminists need to protect this narrative at all costs, and that's why they try to claim a monopoly on discussions of inequality and try to shut down dissent through accusations of sexism. It's really not much different than when fundamentalist Christians say anybody who isn't a Christian is some kind of evil devil worshipper. Just like how these fundamentalist Christians try to claim a monopoly on morality, feminists try to claim a monopoly on equality so they can demonize anybody who speaks out against them and dismiss their arguments as evil. But a movement cannot honestly claim to be a movement for equality if its only concerns with the issues faced by one group to the exclusion of the issues faced by the other. Feminism is fundamentally hostile to men's rights, which not only makes feminism a sexist movement, but also fundamentally antithetical to equality.
You can't criticize feminism because you haven't read feminist theory!
One doesn't need to read up on what feminism is in theory when one can easily see what feminism is in practice. Feminism in its current form is pro-censorship, pro-segregation, anti-egalitarian, actively fights against fathers' rights, undermines the presumption of innocence, and spreads misinformation about the nature of domestic violence and rape. That's all one needs to know about the feminist movement to justify their opposition to it.
Those people who oppose men's rights aren't real feminists!
Aside from this being a no true Scotsman fallacy, this argument is a tacit confession that feminists themselves can't seem to agree on what feminism is really about or what their goals should be. The feminist movement is fragmented into various denominations, each with their own conflicting beliefs and dogmas, between liberal feminists, radical feminists, sex-positive feminists, sex-negative feminists, choice feminists, Marxist feminists, gender feminists, TERFs, feminists who say feminism helps men too, feminists who say feminism isn't concerned with men's issues, feminists who say anybody who wants equality is a feminist, feminists who say men can't be feminists, etc. It seems that feminism is little more than a label. But by engaging in this sort of damage control and attempting to distance themselves from the denominations they disagree with, feminists demonstrate that they are more concerned with the feminist label than they are with their ostensible cause of equality. If the people engaging in this sort of damage control really cared about equality, they would stop trying to defend this label which they know has become toxic and drop it in favor of one which doesn't carry so many negative connotations, such as egalitarianism or humanism. But they don't do that because defending the reputation of their clique is more important to them than advocating for equal rights.
It's hypocritical of you to criticize Islam for oppressing women when you also criticize feminism!
Most of the people who criticize feminism actually do care about gender equality, but see feminism as a threat to equality due to its overt preference for women and denial of men's issues, which is why they criticize it. Feminism also has an apparent disregard for the women who are being oppressed in the Muslim world. It seems that if the oppression of women can't be blamed on white men in the Western world, then it doesn't exist in the feminist mind. This is what makes feminism so hypocritical. One cannot claim to be fighting for gender equality and then completely overlook the oppression of women once doing so becomes inconvenient to your narrative that Western imperialism is the most evil influence in the world. The fact that feminists defend Islam, a religion and ideology which actually is patriarchal and patently and undeniably harmful to women, while claiming to be fighting for women's rights, is an extremely valid reason to criticize feminism.
Men spread their legs in public to take up as much room as possible as an expression of dominance.
Men spread their legs in public because the bone structure of a man's pelvis is different than that of a woman's and makes it so that it requires conscious effort for a man to keep his legs together. That and the fact that seats on public transportation tend to be low to make them comfortably accessible to as many people as possible, but with the result of making them too short for the average man, who's taller than the average woman, to sit on them without their knees being lifted slightly. In this case, gravity contributes to the natural inclination for a man's thighs to spread. Furthermore, men sit like this even when there isn't anybody around to see them, so it's clearly not an expression of dominance, and more an expression of wanting to sit comfortably. All of this talk about man-spreading is just yet another excuse for feminists to hate men.
Gender is a social construct!
To assert that gender is a social construct, which is to say, the differences between men and women are the result of social conditioning, is to ignore the fact that there exist physiological differences between the male and female brains, which undoubtedly affect the way we behave. It also fails to explain why male and female babies begin exhibiting different behavioral tendencies as early as 6 months of age, long before they have any understanding of the concept of gender or social expectations, nor does it explain why male and female non-human primates exhibit different toy preferences in the absence of human gender expectations. Nobody tells a boy monkey that he should play with toy cars, and nobody tells a girl monkey to play with dolls, but they do it because they're biologically hardwired to have different interests, just as male and female humans are.
This society hates women.
If it were true that our society hates women, then it wouldn't be the case that issues which uniquely affect women get substantially more public support than those which affect men. For example, in 2014, even though prostate cancer killed 73% as many men as breast cancer killed women, prostate cancer research only received 43% of the public funding that breast cancer research got that year. For another example, even though men account for almost half of all domestic violence victims, men are routinely rejected from abuse shelters, and while there exist shelters exclusively for women, there aren't any shelters for men, and the ones which used to exist have all shut down due to lack of funding. Men and boys also face bias in the public school system, which puts them at a disadvantage and makes them more likely to drop out of high school and less likely to attend college. Male victims of sexual harassment and rape are often dismissed because of the common notion that sexual harassment and rape are women's issues, and so men can't be victims. Between 70% and 90% of adoption requests are for girls, even when boys make up the majority of children awaiting adoption, and this statistic doesn't include international adoption. Nobody seems to care that men account for 80% of suicides. There's a general attitude that men are disposable or have no value unless they're willing to endanger themselves, and attempts to address men's issues are met with open hostility from feminists and mainstream media. It's very clear that there exists a sympathy gap in our society, but it's inarguably in favor of women.
We don't need an International Men's Day because every day is Men's Day.
Gender issue discussions in public and on campuses are entirely dominated by feminism, and are so slanted by the feminist narrative that most people don't even realize that men have any issues at all. Thanks to feminists disrupting men's issues conferences and protesting documentaries such as The Red Pill, most people don't know that men are 3 times more likely to be victims of homicide than women, 4 times more likely to end up homeless than women, 5 times more likely to commit suicide than women, and are 11 times more likely to die in workplace accidents than women, just to name a few things. We absolutely need to shine a spotlight on these issues because all the voices who are trying to talk about them are being dragged out by feminists complaining about manspreading and unwanted compliments, and demonizing men as potential rapists who need to check their privilege.
Men need to check their privilege.
There are numerous laws and policies enforced by institutions which favor women over men, and I struggle to think of any demonstrating the reverse. For example, women don't have to sign an agreement saying they will fight and die in a war if the government tells them to just to get a driver's license or to qualify for federal aid. A woman has the power to give up a child for adoption in disregard for the wishes of the father. A woman can steal a man's sperm or rape him and then sue him for child support. Female business owners get special tax breaks simply for being women. Family courts are biased in favor of women. Women get more lenient sentences for equivalent crimes, and so on. There are also numerous societal privileges enjoyed by women, such as the fact that female victims of rape and domestic violence aren't laughed at. A woman can make a false rape accusation at little to no personal risk to herself, while her victim becomes a pariah for the rest of his life. Women are substantially less likely to be victims of violence of almost any kind. Girls are more likely to get adopted, women are substantially less likely to end up homeless, and women aren't conditioned from birth to be ashamed of their emotions and to hide them. Really, I could go on, but I already made a video where I list 50 privileges enjoyed exclusively by women. Now, what exactly are the advantages of being male, other than the wage gap which I already explained is a myth? That we don't get catcalled?
The fact that most politicians and CEOs are men is proof of patriarchy and male privilege.
The fact that most politicians and CEOs are men doesn't benefit the average man in any meaningful way. The fact that positions of power are more often than not filled by men is most likely a result of the societal pressure men face to be successful. If we look at this through the lens of evolutionary psychology, the limiting factor of any civilization's growth and continued existence is its female population, because women have the power to give birth. However, a woman can only give birth to so many babies during her lifetime, so a large number of women must be safeguarded to ensure the existence of future generations. Toward this end, any man can do the job of thousands, and this is why men are seen as disposable and get less sympathy in general. Unlike with women, society does not see men as having intrinsic value, so a man must prove his value to society by being useful, and so men are pressured to be protectors and providers, and this is why men feel a stronger urge to get promotions and climb the corporate ladder than women do, hence why men are more likely to secure positions of power.
Sexism towards men doesn't exist because sexism is prejudice plus power, and men have all the power.
While it's true that the majority of CEOs, politicians, and other people in positions of power are men, The fact that most of these powerful people are men doesn't do anything to benefit the common man, as evidenced by the numerous advantages women enjoy in our society, often at the expense of men. When we look at the fact that men are grossly overrepresented when it comes to homelessness and suicide, it's clear that not all men have power. In fact, the average man is no more powerful than the average woman, and I can even argue that the average man is in many ways less powerful than the average woman given all of the advantages enjoyed by women that I already explained.
Feminism helps men too.
There are numerous ways in which policies informed by feminist theory have harmed men. For example, the idea that intimate partner violence is a tool of patriarchal oppression has led to the Duluth model, which forms the basis of law enforcement proceedings which presume the man in any domestic abuse incident to be the one at fault, even when he is the victim, and this informs the policies of abuse shelters which reject male victims. For another example, the feminist concept of toxic masculinity and the notion that gender is a social construct causes our public school system to treat boys as defective girls when they engage in normal boy behavior, resulting in a disproportionately high percentage of schoolboys being put in special education classes or prescribed behavior-altering drugs. Feminists also persistently try to shut down attempts to discuss men's issues in public by disrupting conferences, petitioning to ban material that contradicts their narrative, and shouting down dissenters by labeling them misogynists, harassers, and rape apologists. In the face of all this, I have yet to hear one compelling argument for how feminism can possibly be considered more beneficial to men than it is harmful.
Videos like this are proof of why we need feminism.
To assert that any argument against feminism is proof of why feminism is valid is a non-argument, an attempt to dismiss criticism without explaining why that criticism should be dismissed. It's like saying, they said I was wrong, and I predicted they would say I'm wrong, and that means I'm right. Feminists consistently fail to demonstrate or provide any evidence for their assertion that our society is any way oppressive to women or that our society privileges men at the expense of women. If we were talking about China, India, or pretty much the entire Muslim world, maybe they would have a point. But to assert that feminism is needed to fight the imaginary oppression of women in a society which grants them numerous privileges and exhibits inarguably greater sympathy is simply ridiculous.
Get woke!
It's kind of hard to take you seriously when you pretend to be enlightened, while at the same time sequestering yourself in echo chambers, advocating censorship, promoting segregation, and going out of your way to shut down discussions through acts of intimidation and slander, all under the false pretense of promoting equality and smugly acting as if you have the moral high ground. Something you might want to consider is when you claim to be fighting against hate, that in itself is a combative declaration which requires an enemy. Somebody you can other and direct your own hatred toward and perhaps even dehumanize and rationalize unethical behavior in the pursuit of some greater good. Maybe you should get woke by exercising some self-reflection. So those were 22 dumb feminist arguments. If you can think of any more dumb arguments commonly used by feminists, or if you know of any more rebuttals or would like to expand upon any of the points I made, post them in the comments below. And don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe.